This is Miller Philosopher, and if you couldn't tell by now, Hurin's family is incredibly complex and complicated. And if more casuals knew about their story, I'm convinced that it would put to rest the stereotype that J.R.R. Tolkien writes simplistic stories of good versus evil. By far, the most complicated of them is the second daughter of Hurin and Morwen, Nienor. Short version is this. She's born after Turin is sent to Doriath, lives with her mother Morwen, migrates with her to Doriath from occupied Dorloman, disobeys her when she is told to stay for her own safety, runs into Glaurung while searching for her brother, has a mental battle with him and loses, has amnesia forced upon her by Glaurung, and she ends up fleeing, lost in the woods, discovered by Halidin, who then re-educate her, and taking on a new name, Ninel. Finds Turin, though unknown to her who he actually is, or vice versa, and yet is still immediately drawn to him. Forces him, more or less, into a marriage and gets pregnant. Glaurung returns, and Turin leads a sortie to take him out, but is presumed lost. Ninel is told that Turin is dead and runs off again to find him. She finds him with Glaurung, thinking that he's dead, but then Glaurung wakes up, reveals the truth to Ninel before he finally dies, and Ninel, in immense despair, crashes out and jumps to her death from a ledge. So, that's a fucking lot.
What? What the fuck?
That's why the original video was so long, actually. So, I'm sticking to basically two themes here. The reason behind her crash out and her relation to Morgoth's curse. So, in my opinion, what I essentially think what happened to Nienor was that she basically got hit with a Middle-earth version of multiple personality disorder, so to speak. And let me explain, because I know that someone in the original video kind of didn't like that interpretation, which is fine. Essentially what I mean is that Nienor, for all intents and purposes, was a blonde version of her mother. She had the same cynical and survivalist disposition that was now commonplace among the remaining peoples of Beleriand, with no faith of any kind in deliverance from the Dark Lord of the North. The best they could hope for was to stick together as a family and knew their best to stay out of Morgoth's eye. That being said, she also had the traits of her father, being athletic and an incredibly fast runner, as well as also mule-headed and extremely strong-willed. In my opinion, I think had she had been taught to be a warrior like Hurin and Turin, she might well have become the third greatest mortal warrior of the First Age, and no, I'm not being political with that. I mean, like her brother, Nienor even had the balls to try to go toe-to-toe with a dragon in a psychic battle, even though he could have hard-boiled her in a second. And, on top of all that, was holding her own in a mental battle for some time before she finally succumbed to Glaurung. Now, compare that to the Noldor elves, who were supposed to be badass and better than mortals, yet were absolutely terrified of the dragon. There you are. Now, Nienor had never met Turin, but through Morwen had already come to love him greatly as a brother, in my opinion. Also thanks in no small part as well to his letters from Doriath while they were still living there before they went to find Turin. However, what was all Nienor's personality was an intense focus on her goals, taking the family trait of stubbornness to a whole other level. Once Nienor had her mind set on something, there was absolutely no changing it. And anything or anyone that tried to get in the way of that, save for occasional family even, was cast aside or just flat out ignored. This trait lasted with her even during her stay in Brethil as Ninel. Now, speaking of this, after her first encounter with Glaurung, nearly all these traits are suppressed into a dark area of her mind, an area that becomes so dreadful and painful from that point on that if anyone comes even close to bringing it up, she flips out. And this is because of what Glaurung essentially did to her was pretty much violate her mind. Amnesia is not a family trait. It was forced on Nienor, and it's what leads to the creation, if you will, of the second personality of Ninel. Now, the reason why I say Ninel is a second personality is because that in almost all ways, she is the polar opposite of Nienor. This, to me, feels like more than just a memory loss, even though that's at play as well. Having been raised in the relative safety of Brethil, it allows Ninel to develop a kinder personality than the one she had before. She is no longer as stubborn as she once was, and for all intents and purposes, more or less develops a much warmer personality. Perhaps in some twisted ways, this was the only positive effect of the curse, if you still believe that. Other than PTSD though, the other trait that still wasn't buried under the Ninel personality was her sense of family loyalty. She is drawn to Turin for some unknown reason, yet is profound enough that she takes it to be love. She's never met Turin, and nor has Turin met her. As I said in the last video, both siblings were aware that the other existed, but had never met each other. And this is even though that Turin as well was going under a different name, just like Ninel was. So it's with these factors in mind that they form a very, very strong bond. So much so that when Brander, out of a jealous rage, tells her that her husband is dead, Ninel flat out rejects it and runs off to find him. So what happens in the end is that essentially these two personas, if you will, are what finally caused her breakdown. Nienor and Ninel were two complete opposites in the same body. The Nienor persona was now back in charge, and I don't think she could handle the sudden reveal of what her life had been like as a Ninel. No hints or no prep time whatsoever to get ready for it. It was a second violation from the dragon because Glaurung again had forced her to remember that dark place in her mind that she had spent so much effort trying to avoid and forget. Ninel had done things with her brother that she never would have if she had been in her right mind as Nienor. And all this was ultimately compounded by the fact that now she was also pregnant with their child. A child of incest, mind you. And this isn't Game of Thrones where shit like that flies all the time. In the world of Tolkien, this kind of thing is one of the most serious offenses that one could commit. So, all that being said, what about my second point, that she was a victim of Morgoth's curse? Well, I think, like her brother, that Nienor wasn't as much a victim of a supernatural curse, but rather circumstances based on how her story plays out. Now, while you could argue that her first encounter with Glaurung was fated, I would counter that it need not have happened at all if she had just listened to her mother and stayed in Doriath. Nienor suffered the same flaw as the rest of her family. She was extremely stubborn, arguably the most stubborn out of all of them. Moreover, Glaurung didn't even know where Nienor, Turin, or Morwen were at that time. He was just sent out to wreck shit and told by Morgoth, oh, and by the way, if you run into these people, make their lives hell. Hence why he doesn't kill the children of Hurin on sight. If Nienor is the victim of anything from Morgoth, it's that she was made a personal target of interest and bore the worst of his malice more than any of her family. That her theme within the Silmarillion narrative as a whole was one of embodying the fall of the Edain. From barely surviving the apocalyptic battle of unnumbered tears, to falling into such a state of disrepair and desperation that even unaliving yourself now was becoming an option to people. And it is these factors that make her such a tragic figure in Tolkien's Legendarium and in the family overall, and yet at the same time, I feel anyway, does not take anything away from her whatsoever, because there was greatness there that was just never realized or just manipulated. But let me know your own thoughts below, if you agreed if what she had was a type of multiple personality thing going on, or if you think it was something else, even fate. Let me know your thoughts below. This is the Miller Philosopher. Have a good day.